Okay, welcome back. My name is Karim, and I'm a researcher here. And right now, we're working very hard with research applications on this particular subject. Yeah, it's. I think it's very exciting, and um, my role here, is to kind of give you some inspirations, some ideas, something to think about on what to explore in this field. I'm not going to give a presentation. I'm just going to talk the old-fashioned way. I'm going to try to do two things. First, I'm going to give you kind of a general, some kind of general idea of how to avoid some of the hype, because there's a lot of hype here, and it's very easy as a social scientist or as a person who's not um, a computer scientist to commit mistakes, and that's unnecessary. And then give you some ideas or tools of idea, or how to find ideas to explore. And these are just my suggestions. Okay, first of all, avoiding the hype. There's a lot of hype out there, and this is natural, so to speak. When a technology is new, it always gets hyped like this. You all remember nanotechnology 2 decades ago. In the 1990s, it was the Human Genome Project. We would have clone armies by now, and so on. So it's nothing particular or new. Although I think there are some things about AI that makes it extra prone to hype. And we can talk about that later. So one of the things that you can do when you look at a news article or a report that says something about AI, I think it's very useful to ask yourself, what is actually going on here? So the article says, perhaps, AI diagnosed cancer. In many cases, what you will actually find when you look at the article that is linked behind is that the AI could identify a cancerous tumor in a data set. And of course, identifying a tumor is not the same thing as diagnosing cancer. Another thing you could ask yourself is, how general is this result? Is this just a very specific subtask, or is this a task that can be generalized across many different domains? And this is one area where we humans get it often very wrong, because if you look at what a human can do, like if a human can open a door handle that opens like this, we also assume that they can open a door handle that opens like this, right? Most people that can do one thing can do the other. This is not true for robots. So the next thing you could ask yourself is, okay, this robot could open a doorknob that looked like this. Can it open a doorknob that you have to screw on the other direction, for example? This is not necessarily the case. A robot can walk forwards, but can it walk backwards? It's not necessarily the case that it can. Next thing to consider is, are researchers or their press people, are they saying that this AI is better than humans, superhuman? Then I think you could ask yourself, better than which human? And how much better, and how is this possible? As Smoa explained before, many of the AIs are based on old data. For example, an interviewer makes an assessment of whether someone is a good candidate for being employed or being interviewed, or a bad one. The AI takes this data and aggregates it, and then gives a suggestion based on that. It's fairly obvious that unless you do something very special with that data, that the AI cannot become better than these interviewers are, right? So that's one case where if you find someone that claims that this is better than humans, then you need to ask yourself, how is this possible, and better than which humans? Other cases, like the ones Pontus talked about, where an AI trains against itself, where one AI generates an image and the other AI tries to spot which one is fake and which one is a true image. Those are cases where AI can become superhuman in relatively short span of time, because they're not constrained by human data, in the same sense at least. And finally, I mean, I could go on, but are kind of the main points that I want to make. How robust is the AI system? Um, could it work just as well with other data sets, for example? This is not always the case. Sometimes you train an AI with one data set, then you try to train the AI with another, seemingly very similar data set, and it just doesn't work. Would changing a minor aspect of the situation crash the AI? This happened with DeepMind had one of their like early results that were very that was talked about a lot. Is this a game where you have a little platform that bounces a ball and it's supposed to like smash bricks in the roof, and the DeepMind's AI could solve this very elegantly. It turned out that if you lower this platform a little bit, like 2 pixels, the AI could perform like no better than chance. So this is an example of how AI can be extremely fragile to small changes in the environment. Another thing that's interesting is whether or not this AI can another example from real life is whether or not this AI can, for example, work during the night, if it could work during the day, or if it could work when there's sunset or sunrise and so on. So my point here is that AI works very differently from how humans work, how human intelligence works. And a lot of our intuitions about spotting mistakes are adapted to how we would identify mistakes in humans. And this makes us vulnerable to overestimate the potential of AI or how good an AI is. And just to give you an example from the recruitment field, I just learned about an interesting hack that people start doing, and they write on their CVs, they write Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard with a white color, so no one can read it, but the AI reads it and it gives them very good score because it says Cambridge. So yeah, of course, probably the more advanced AI companies that are using the system have addressed this. Because it could be easy to, some of them at least, probably, but it's easy to hack an AI. It could be easy, but when the hack is published or known, it's also relatively easy to address, in some cases at least. Okay, so that was kind of some pointers of how to avoid the hype. So some heuristics about what to do then. I want to say, okay, 3 things. Consider the past, consider the present, and look beyond the immediate impact. Let's starting with looking to the past. So in the past, we've had a lot of technology shifts, and people at that time were also making a lot of predictions about what would happen with those shifts. So I learned recently that the Secretary of State in the US, Bob McNamara, had very optimistic views of how a VCR technology, videotapes, how those would like transform the education system, and how would they usher in a new era of hyper competent, super advanced knowledge workers, and that we wouldn't need teachers anymore. So this was kind of one of hype back then. And yes, he was wrong, but why was he wrong? So I don't know the answer to that. But the answer to why he was wrong might be similar to the answer for whether or not we're wrong today in making similar assertions about AI. So, and this is just an example. We can look at many technologies in the past and what we thought would happen and what did happen or didn't happen. Another example is that when word processing software was introduced in the modern office, a lot of people thought that this is going to transform the modern office. And actually it did. So not only word processing software, but a whole suite of software programs and personal computers did have a huge impact on the modern office and how office work looked like. It didn't become the paperless office, but ve- uh, there were very few secretaries after the late 90s in many offices. And this was a big difference. So you can ask yourself, why did this happen? How could word processing be so effective at transforming a business? And what lessons can we draw from that when thinking about technologies that are coming out now and their impact on existing workplaces? What about the present? Okay, so Pontus talked a bit about future applications and that are in the prototype stage or in the kind of scaling up stage. One thing that could be easier to consider for social scientists is things that actually exist in the real world right now, like the things that Moa is looking at. AI systems that are being used by actual companies and that are affecting actual people right now. So I think we could direct our attention to those. And there are basically 4 fields where AI now is being used in a major way. I mean, these are not the only one, but I think they are like the more the more interesting ones. So one of them are recommendation systems or recommendation machines. I'll get back to this, but recommendation machines are simply machines that recommend something to someone. Like they might recommend an employee to a company. They might recommend a news article to a person on Facebook. They might recommend a friend on someone on Facebook. You maybe know X. They may recommend a film to watch. They may even recommend someone to date on a dating site. And these aim to improve matching. But of course, whether or not they do depends on the incentives of the ones who control the recommendation system, among other things. Another thing that's very interesting that's happening and that's progressing at a fast pace is voice-controlled machines. And some of you maybe have an Alexa or Google Home. So these systems are populating our homes. I don't know what can happen with them, but I think that the change, when you change the interface between humans and machines, a lot of things, if you look again historically, a lot of things changed too. The computer mouse and the keyboard changed a lot of the ways in which we interacted with machines. Image search and identification is also one of those technologies that's being used a lot today. Google had the technology a while ago to allow you to insert an image and not only find similar images, but try to find the exact same person. They have so far refrained from releasing this technology because they were concerned that it would be used for malicious purposes. Husbands who want to track down their ex-wives and hurt them, or people who stalk other people, or even security services and so on, that could use an image that they found on someone and then try to find that person on the internet, or try to find information about that person. And finally, and this is of course what you've been reading a lot about with regards to China, surveillance. And it's not unique to China, but they have, at least in the Xinjiang province, a very well-developed system of image recognition, image storage, and image identification, but also voice identification. So people who get arrested by the police are nowadays told to read stories into a machine and sing songs and repeat a lot of words. And the idea is that the machine can learn the voice of that particular person, so that person can be identified not only through image recognition, but also through voice recognition on, for example, bugs or other kind of hardware. Surveillance is, of course, very well. The situation in Xinjiang is very dark, and so on. But surveillance is something that could also come to Western countries, and to some extent it already has. And yeah, it could change a lot of things with regards to crime, petty crime, and so on. Finally, I want to say a few things about impact, immediate impact and indirect impact. So a lot of the things that we read about in the media are formulated by people that are not social scientists. They're often engineers or journalists that are specialized in, computer engineering or technology. And they often look at the direct impact of a technology. So they say like, yeah, now we have this autonomous vacuum cleaner. The consequences is that people's home are going to be cleaner. But as social scientists, we know that society is complex, that technology shapes society not only directly, but also that the social impact of technology is mediated through social dynamics and social mechanisms and social norms. So one example of that is the contraceptive pill. That the direct impact is that people can control their women can control their reproduction. But the social impacts, of course, of the contraceptive pill were much more, much bigger, and maybe much more interesting. Well, I don't know, much more interesting, but at least much bigger. And I think this is the kind of approach that I would advocate for us to take, to not only look at, take face value what the technologists are saying, but use our knowledge about social science and think the next step. What is this going to do in a society as ours? So let me give you an example that I thought was very interesting from a recent publication on the effect of online dating. So online dating has only recently become associated with recommendation systems. For a long time, it was just, usual good old-fashioned AI. But recently, recommendation systems have supercharged dating apps, and dating apps are now, are now one of the most prominent ways in which people meet each other. One of the interesting consequences of this is that the number of interracial marriages in the US has exploded, and and this seems to be driven by the adoption of these dating apps. And from a kind of sociological perspective, it's perhaps not that surprising. Before dating apps, people tended to meet other people in their social networks, in offline social networks, that is. And in a very segregated society like the US, those would be mostly of the same race. With dating apps, you can break that barrier and find people from other races. So this was an interesting finding, an interesting publication. But what I also found interesting was all the parts that were lacking from that publication. Because I think a good social scientist would have asked a further question. Which races are mixing? Are these black and white, or and what are the gender dynamics? Is it white men that are meeting non-white women, or is it Latinos who are mixing? All those things, all those kind of further social questions. How does the kind of income affect, and so on? All those questions were absent from that paper. And I think that a good social scientist would have asked those questions. So I think that paper to me illustrates how we should not only look at the direct effects, but also the kind of social effects, but also how we as social scientists and philosophers and so on can ask more interesting questions or come up with more interesting research in this field. That was all.